I'm doing a series of videos and presentations on Zoom fatigue. Last week, in part one, I talked about Zoom fatigue. What is it? What causes it? And is it real? And the causes that we're going to look at are excessive close-up eye gaze, cognitive load, the all-day mirror effect, and the constraints on physical mobility. In part two, that's this video, I want to talk about this concept of excessive close-up eye gaze and what that means. So the several articles that have been written on Zoom fatigue and what causes it talk about the fact that we are looking at each other for prolonged periods of time, and that has some effects, long studied effects. And one famous study is the impact of standing in an elevator with people where you're forced to be in close proximity with strangers. And what happens is you get in an elevator, you see this all the time. People look down or they look around, but they won't catch your gaze. But in a virtual meeting, you're asked to be in this close proximity with people who are maybe friends, coworkers, colleagues, sometimes even strangers. And you get this sense of false intimacy, this close-up eye gaze in Zoom and other platforms. It's the same thing as about standing maybe 50 centimeters away from somebody. Now, the studies show that 60 centimeters or closer, that proximity is saved and is exclusively for intimate friends, loved ones. And yet we're in Zoom meetings like that for hours on end with people who may be strangers. They might even be colleagues, but they're definitely not that level of intimacy that we have with loved ones. So we want to be aware of this close-up piece. So when you're in the speaker mode and you have that big face talking at you, that can increase the stress and fatigue that you experience as a result of virtual meetings. Now, there's another piece to this, and that is you may be thinking, well, I can just switch to gallery view. Well, again, back to that elevator experiment, there's some other findings that they have that when you do have that eye gaze, so you know that joke, you step into the elevator, instead of playing the game where everybody looks down or looks around, you stand in the front and you look at everybody and you greet everybody. Well, that can be taken by the group as confrontation. So when you go to gallery view, there are some indications that can be seen, or you can experience that as confrontation and therefore push you into the fight or flight mode. So you have the excessive close-up eye gaze and the intimacy of the speaker view, and you have the potential threat of the elevator view or the gallery view. So what can we do as participants and as facilitators to help combat that? Well, a few things. Zoom is very much left to the participant as how they experience it. You have a lot of control when you're watching a Zoom or a virtual meeting. You can control the size. You can just minimize your window, make it smaller, and therefore the faces will be smaller and you won't feel as you're as close. You can switch between gallery view and speaker view to break that field a little bit. You have control over those things. So another thing outside of the Zoom controls or the platform controls, take notes. That will break that gaze. You're still being engaged, but taking notes can help break up that prolonged eye gaze. Another piece is avoiding the tablets and the phones, because it's a more stressful experience from the start. The other thing that you can choose is you can choose how you're reading the other people's language. That's assume best intent. If the part of this is the feeling of lack of intimacy, is that you can reduce the threat level if you're assuming that the people that you're interacting with have your best intent involved. So those are some ways that you as a participant can reduce the effects of prolonged eye gaze. Now, as a facilitator, a leader of a meeting, there's some things I can do as well. One is if you noticed what I've done here, if you've ever seen in my other stuff, I tend to like to have more of a close-up shot, but I'm starting to do reduce my distance, or I've increased my distance from the camera. The good part is that it could reduce the stress of the people watching. It also shows, if I'm in the middle of a project like I am right now, what is behind me in the office. again, I can encourage note taking. If I can stop and say, okay, go write this down, do this. Those are ways that you can encourage people to break up that excessively long eye gaze problem. Use share screen. Whenever you break up the routine, if I sit here and talk like I'm doing over this video, I did share my screen a couple of times. But if I share my screen, I switch the visual field so people change what they're looking at in their eye gaze. I can also ask people to annotate. And now all of a sudden, they're not focused on the people or the speaker, they're focused on the content. And there's all kinds of different things that you can do to increase the engagement and connection with people. And that's another one. We say connection before content, and both of those in order to get things done. So if you create opportunities for people to connect, to tell stories, to talk, to chat, all of a sudden they know the people that they're interacting with better. And that reduces that sense of dealing with strangers. You're now dealing with friends. So the intimacy level has increased. So those are some things that you can do as a participant and that you can do as a presenter facilitator to combat the impact of excessively long eye gaze in virtual meetings.